Welcome to the 902 Podcast, the official podcast of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Captain John Vik, and I want to thank you for tuning in. This podcast will give you an inside look at LSO with topics and guests to discuss public safety issues impacting Lancaster County. Be sure to subscribe for highlights on news, cases, and the people working for you at LSO. You can also follow us across social media by searching for @LSO Nebraska. That's @LSO Nebraska on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in to the 902 Podcast. I'm Captain John Vik, and in studio with me today I have Sheriff Terry Wagner.
Good afternoon.
And Chief Deputy Ben Houchin.
Hello.
Appreciate you being here. We've got a special guest with us today to talk about election security, and that is Lancaster County Election Commissioner Todd Wiltgen. Todd, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Captain Vik, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you guys. So I wanted to give our audience just a little bit of insight into, who you are, where you came from. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. I've been a resident of Lincoln since the late 90s. I moved here after college at the time to work for U.S. Senator Chuck Hagel. Started working for him. Worked continuously for him until he retired in January of 2009. I helped the transition with Senator Johans, and then I left, did a few things, worked for 5 years for Congressman Fortenberry, decided to run for the county board, served one term on that board. The last 4 years, I've been at the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, and then just recently, the Governor Pillen appointed me to be the new Lancaster County Election Commissioner.
Awesome.
So I've been around a while, had different roles in the community.
I was going to say you're definitely not a stranger to public service in Lancaster County.
No, I'm not a stranger to government. I'll just leave it at that. I've got experience at the federal level. I've also served 1 year as a legislative aide in the legislature, so I've got some state experience. I've got a lot of experience at the local level, and so I've been around for a while.
What is it for you about public service that kind of led you into this line of work?
Yeah, it was not something that I intended to do when I started my college career. I kind of stumbled onto public service through an internship program. My degree is actually I have a bachelor's of science in business administration with an emphasis in accounting. So technically, I'm an accountant by education, but I just became involved, introduced to public service through an internship program at University of Nebraska County. That was an internship for Senator Hagel. Was inspired by his service and others like him, who decided that their career would be to improve the lives of everyday public at the federal, state, and local level. And so that kind of inspired me. That's kind of how I got my start, and that's kind of the path I've taken.
So when we're talking about the election commission, was there something in particular about that job that interested you in this line of work that you're doing now?
Yeah, I was familiar with my predecessor. When I first moved to Lincoln, Dave Shively was still working for Congressman Beerider. So I worked with Dave before he was appointed election commissioner. And we've been friends for the last 23 years. And so I worked closely with him. Obviously, having run for office myself, I had interaction with Dave in that process. Then when I was a county board member, I worked with Dave, making sure that our county elections were funded appropriately. And so I've always been very interested in elections. I think it's really important that they're one of the foundations of our democracy. So I've always been interested in elections. Even when I wasn't involved, I still paid attention to results, making sure that that everything ran smoothly. And so when Dave announced last fall that he was retiring, I thought that it might be something I would want to do. I talked to my family, talked to some friends, and definitely given my background, I thought that my skill set would be very helpful in administering our elections here in Lancaster County.
Well, we just appreciate you kind of sharing a little bit of insight with us, with our listeners. And I think there may be some people out there who aren't completely familiar with county government that may not know what the election commissioner or the election commission does. Yep. So what is your role and how does that work?
Yeah, well, in Lancaster County, in Douglas and Sarpy County in Nebraska, we have 3 counties where our election commissioners are actually appointed by the governor. And their responsibility is to be the administrative officer overseeing the elections for the county with the oversight of the Secretary of State. And that's by state law. And so our primary role is to make sure that any election, whether it be our statewide or presidential elections, down to our municipal elections, even our special elections for bond levy overrides, or anything to do with elections in the county are my responsibility.
So in the counties that don't have that appointment, how is there someone that oversees those elections, or how does that work?
Yeah, in those smaller counties, it's your county clerk.
Okay.
And so they're the ones that are responsible for elections. But in Lancaster, and they call them the big 3, Sarpy and Douglas, it's a separate office, and the official is appointed by the governor.
Okay. Well, it sounds like a big job in itself, and so it's certainly something that you don't do all by yourself. So how many folks do you have working for you over there?
Yeah, we have a permanent staff of 8.
Okay.
That they are always there, even when we're not in an election season. We have an additional 12 who are temporary. They work when we have elections, and then we also have on the day of election, we have election boards in almost 200 precincts across the county, and those boards range from 3 to 5 people. So it's one of those where downtime, we have 8 people, in high traffic times, we have almost 20. And then, on election days, when we have poll locations, we have several hundred.
Sure. So a seasonal rotation, it kind of follows the elections, the cycle, I'm guessing. Yeah. And
we're also unique in Lancaster County. We always have elections, at least 2 every year.
Okay.
In the even numbered years is when we have the primary and general elections for the statewide and for the presidential elections. So in 22 and 24, coming up in 24, we'll have a presidential primary in May of next year, and then a general election in November of next year. In the odd number of years, we always have our city elections. We have a primary and general election. They're not as far spread out as they are in the even numbered years. So like right now, on Tuesday, we'll have our city primary election. 4 weeks later, on Tuesday, May 2nd, we'll have our city's general election. And so we always have at least 2 elections in Lancaster County. 2, I would say, major elections.
So, Sheriff, as somebody that's run for office and in office as an elected official now, what does that process look like as a candidate? Do you have a lot of interaction with the election commission, or is it just at certain times during your candidacy?
Well, there's a number of different phases. Elected officials have to file paperwork with the Accountability and Disclosure Commission. The election commissioner has always been a great resource for what do I do here? What do I need to do here to fulfill these requirements? And so, the election commissioner is a real good resource for elected officials, and then reminds us of those dates, that there are deadlines for filing certain documents that have to be done, and the election commissioner is very good about pushing that information out to candidates and making sure they know when those deadlines are so we don't run afoul of that law.
And if I heard you right, Todd, there are elections for candidates that come normally, but then there are some other issues that come up from time to time, special elections and bond levies and things like that.
Yeah. As an example, a few years ago, the city of Lincoln, Lincoln Public Schools, wanted to issue bonds for construction of new facilities, and they did so through a special election, and that was done in February of 2020. And so that was a vote by mail. So all the voters in the county got ballots, and that was the only topic on the ballot was that one issue. And so that's why it was called a special election. There's one coming up for the voters in the Raymond School District. Their school board has proposed, I think, a $47.5 million bond issue to make improvements to the school. So those general obligation bonds for school districts do require a vote of the public, but also to obligate that debt. But also there's in state statute, there's some override opportunities. If public bodies want to override a levy lid on their authority, then it would require a vote of the people. So from time to time, there may be, a special election for a school district or some other taxing authority. But those are, maybe one or two every year. But we have a lot of political subdivisions in Lancaster County that have the opportunity to do that.
Okay.
So.
A question that we see a lot on the news and hear a lot about in the media is election security, and that's why we brought you in to talk today, because we work with you on election security a little bit. But I know it's a question that's on a lot of people's minds of, is it like I hear on some of the national media, or are there certain procedures that we have in place in Nebraska and Lancaster County to keep some of our elections, well, not some, but all of our elections secure?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we do appreciate the sheriff's office. It does provide us with some security at our physical office, but our elections are secure in Lancaster County and in the state of Nebraska. There are systems in place. There are really a couple ways in which people think about voting, and one is voting by mail, and another one is voting at the polls on election day. And so both have very similar operations that support those opportunities. We have a voter file in the state of Nebraska that is very secure. We maintain it on a regular basis. And so there are safeguards in place that do not permit individuals who aren't eligible to register to vote. They prevent them from registering to vote. And so that's one of my responsibilities is when we receive an application for a voter, we have the responsibility to verify that those individuals are eligible before they are put into the system. And then there's several cross-checkings that go on behind the scenes with various departments. And so that's the first key, is to make sure that people who are eligible to vote are in the system. And then through the process, when we do administer an election, we have systems in place to make sure that a registered voter can vote once and only once. And whether that's by mail, early voting, or in person. There's this myth out there that somehow that people are able to print out ballots and they would just show up. That's not possible. Like I said, we keep our ballots secured physically at a safe location, and then we basically track every single ballot to make sure that every ballot is accounted for on the day of the election. And so, and there's, the technology has improved dramatically to make sure that the ballots are secure. And so it's very difficult to counterfeit them. It's not something where you can just go out and make copies, and it's got to be the right type of paper, the right type of ink. It's just like currency. It's very secure, and so we have to even down to the weight of the paper. So
okay. Well, we actually had a meeting recently with some of our command staff and with you from your office, and that was just to go over some, I guess, concerns in preparation for this next election. So what are some of the concerns that come on your radar on an election day when you're preparing?
Well, we have, for our upcoming elections, we have almost 170,000 people who would be eligible to vote, and they're going to be able to vote in almost 178 precincts throughout the city. And so just making sure that those sites are secure. There's a lot of work that goes into that. And we appreciate the Sheriff's Office for their guidance on that. And, there are state laws unfortunately in the past, there have been issues, not in Lancaster County, but in other parts of the country where, there's been intimidation and other issues that come up on election day. So we just, one of our roles is to make sure that the voting experience is safe. And so to do that, there is some planning that goes in. But like I said, all that primarily is for planning purposes. Most voters in Lincoln, have a safe and, don't have to worry about their issues at their polling place. But like I said, just in case, there's issues about poll observing, as well as what can be done in and around a polling location. There's some statutes about what's called electioneering, to make sure that any campaign activity is at least 200 feet from a polling location. And so sometimes candidates forget that, and that could be construed as trying to influence the electorate, which is not a good thing.
So what might be an example of electioneering?
So if a candidate is on the ballot, let's say, and somebody wants to show up at their polling location wearing that person's T-shirt, that's not permittable. That is, by definition, electioneering.
Okay.
And so stuff like that happens. I mean,
Sure.
Some of it's not intentional; it just happens. But then there are some people that do show up that at a polling location and want to put up a sign or hand out flyers or try to influence the voters' intent, which is not permittable. And so again, it happens from time to time, and just we need to put up safeguards to prevent that from happening. That's why there's a state law in place that prevents that type of activity within 200 feet of a polling location.
So, Sheriff, Chief, what would you say your position or guidance is, to deputies that are working at these types of events? I mean, what is our role there? Is it a constitutional role to, like Todd is saying, to provide that safe environment, or what is our role there in the process?
Well, our role is not spelled out in statute at all. But I think it's long ago we realized that election days can be somewhat emotional, maybe, and that we need to do what we can to help the election process go as smoothly as possible. And so we've had deputy sheriffs out of the election commissioner's office, for a long time, 15 or 20 years that I can remember. Recently, we purchased a camera trailer with aerial boom, and it was specific. One of the criteria for getting the grant for that trailer was election safeguards, and so we deploy that trailer out there. So we were able to photograph the entire parking lot and the drop box at the election commissioner's office, so that should there be any kinds of allegations of fraud or abuse, we can review the camera footage and determine if anything went awry there.
Sure. Then, I mean, I know we talk about this with public demonstrations and things like that a lot, that we don't really take a side on these things, but we want people to be able to exercise their rights. And even if it's not protesting, voting in an election is certainly a right as a U.S. citizen. And would you agree?
Oh, most definitely. And you never know what you're preventing just because you have a uniformed law enforcement officer there. Somebody may pull up who's thinking maybe they're going to do something, and they see that and they go, well, I'm not going to do that now. So you don't know what you prevent by having them there. But I think people who go vote and do that and come there feel a lot safer with the deputies out there. And I'm glad we are out there doing that.
You bet. So another topic that we hear a lot about are mail-in ballots.
Yep.
And I think that's something that's kind of picked up popularity. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. In my limited experience, just I'm in my 6th week, and looking back on trends. So our last mayoral election, which was the spring of 2019, we mailed out 16,000 ballots to early voters. So far, just for this primary, we've mailed out 34,000.
Wow.
So we've almost doubled. And I think you saw in the last 3 years during the pandemic, you had the 2020 elections, you had our city elections in 2021, and then we had last year's elections. And I think people realized that voting by mail is safe and it's convenient, and they are using it more readily these days because they can request a ballot. It can be mailed to them. They can return it either in person or by mail. And then they don't have to worry about, what's going on the day of the election, especially if they're working or they have other commitments. And so, it's secure as well. I mean, it's secured by the U.S. Postal Service. And there's, again, same safeguards, making sure that when we mail out ballots, where we track every single request, every single ballot. Anybody that calls the office, we can monitor what the status is of those ballots all the way through the election day. And when it gets counted, after the election, there's, again, processes in place to verify the accuracy of the election. So
you mentioned request a few times.
Yeah.
So does everybody get a ballot mailed to them, or
No.
Okay? So
No.
how does that work? If I do want to use a mail-in ballot,
Right.
What do I have to do?
So the state law is very clear that you need to request. Anybody out there that's registered to vote can request an early ballot by mail. It has to be in writing, and the request has to include your name, your signature, and it also must ask for the ballot, and it has to specify for what elections. And so when we receive those, then we will mail it out. The request also has to include a mailing address about where the ballot should be mailed to. If it's not your address that you're registered to vote at, if it's a forwarding address, that needs to be included.
Okay.
But that's all it needs. There are forms out there. I mean, most of our requests are actually done by a form. The Secretary of State has them on their website. We have them on our website. We mail out, there's about 60,000 voters who are on our permanent early vote request list who gets a little postcard, a yellow one, every election. But they have to request a ballot. There's this myth out there that we just mail out ballots to everybody and multiple ballots. No, that's false. We only mail one ballot to a voter who requests it.
Is there anything to stop someone from requesting a mail-in ballot, but then showing up at a polling place on election day?
Yes. And so we track everybody that's requested a ballot. In our system, before the election, we will print our poll books, and we will put on that poll book that voter will be listed. However, it will be listed that they voted by absentee, and the poll workers will not let them vote in person on election day.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about. And I know people ask that question a lot. Is that what keeps it? But that makes perfect sense on why.
Yep. And so, again, and we track all that.
Okay.
And so I know people may show up who have requested a ballot, and they say, well, I've lost my ballot. I still want to vote. Well, they can do that. They'll have to fill out a provisional ballot, which is a regular ballot, but it takes a different path towards, it's put in a different envelope, and those are not counted until after election day. And those are reviewed by a canvassing board who will actually review, and we will make sure that that person who filled out a provisional ballot, before we count that ballot, we will make sure that their ballot that was mailed to them was not returned.
Have you guys ever used a mail-in?
I use it all the time.
You do?
A number of years ago, I started, having conflicts on election day, and I didn't want to miss voting, and so I requested I knew I was going to be out of town, so I requested a mail-in ballot. So now I'm on the mail-in ballot list. I get the postcard at my house that says, "Do you want a mail-in ballot?" And I say yes. Mail it back, and then I'll get the ballot. It gives me a chance to review the candidates, make sure I know who they are, where they stand on issues. It gives me a better opportunity to really vote intelligently. And the only bad thing about voting absentee, and this is kind of, I like the "I voted" sticker that the Board of Realtors gives to everybody who votes in person. I think that's a badge of honor that I voted today, and you don't get those when you vote absentee. But that's the only drawback I can see of it.
I never have, so I'll grab you one, and so I'll bring you one of those stickers so you can have one and walk around. Because I've always, it's kind of just been a routine and kind of a ritual on just going to the polling place and actually sitting there and doing it. And I just always thought this is the easiest way for me to go, and I like that part of it. And so
just two comments. One, I was the same way for years. I used to enjoy going to Cooser Elementary, and I would always go after work. Just after almost 7 o'clock, I'd go in and just to vote, see what number I was.
Yep.
But one election, I almost missed out because something came up, and I needed to. I barely made it because you have to be in line by 8 o'clock on election night, and so it was too close. And so anyway, I decided that moving forward, with my busy schedule, that it would be best if I voted early to make sure my vote counted. But also, unfortunately, we discussed maybe sending out those little stickers in the early vote by mail envelopes. But the problem is sometimes those stickers come off in the envelope, and then you have
a whole mess.
You have stickers sticking to things and tearing things. And the thing about those ballots is that they're very sensitive. So you really don't want anything in that envelope that you don't need.
No food, no drink.
No food, no drink, no other materials. Like I said, those, again, anything that gets in those can be problematic.
So how many of those votes that where they say, hey, I lost mine, I didn't vote, how many in last year's election, how many were there of those types? Do you know?
Well, the people that show up and cast provisional ballots, there are usually a few hundred, but there's other reasons why they might be voting provisionally. The law allows for a lot of times people, and you know this because you're in law enforcement, people have moved in Lancaster County and they just never got their address updated on their driver's license. The same issue. They moved within Lancaster County, and they didn't register to vote at their new address. So the law does allow those people who just move within the county to show up at their new polling location and vote provisionally. And those are only if they move within the boundaries of the county. People that move from out of state or the other 92 counties are not permitted to do that. But again, if you're moving in the side of the county, Nebraska law does allow you to cast a provisional ballot. But again, those are counted afterwards.
Right.
They're reviewed by a board that actually will look at their original, where were they registered to vote before? Yeah, they did move, whether it be down the street, a few blocks or across town, or, that's verified, and then those votes are counted.
Because it would be illegal for somebody to move from one precinct to another and then go to their old precinct to vote. That's illegal.
Well, yeah, it's not permissible, and
Right.
so you have to vote in the precinct where you
reside.
where you reside, and so you can't go to the polling location where you used to live. You have to go to the polling place where you now live.
Okay.
And so,
And I think the provisional ballots became pretty apparent last election in one of the county races where there were a number of provisional ballots out, and it took 4 or 5 days, and that race was very, very close, and that mathematically could have changed the outcome.
yeah, it's possible depending on what the race is. But what happens is that, again, those extra days are needed to make sure that all the poll books are checked in. Everybody that voted the day of, we verify that those are the people that when they cast those ballots, those are the ballots. And they what we do is we will make sure that nobody that casted a provisional ballot voted on election day. And that, again, people complain about the delay in counting those provisional ballots. But again, it's a system to make sure that it's a security measure to make sure that there's only one ballot cast per person.
And everybody's so concerned that they're secure elections.
Right.
They should understand taking some time and doing that part.
Yeah, and there's really no way to speed that process up. Just because the safeguards that are built in, they just take time. They take a few days, but so the elections are usually on Tuesday. The ones for the city and for the state are on Tuesday. So usually those ballots, hopefully are resolved by the Friday of that week. Rarely does it have to go into the next week, but all the canvassing and everything has to be certified in a matter of days. And then what sometimes happens is whenever all the votes get counted, you end up having to go to an automatic recount. When the races are, when there's a 1% deviation from the top vote getter, then automatic recount may be triggered. And that just delays the process a little bit more. But
Yeah, I think the important thing for people to remember is that just because a request for an early ballot gets mailed to a house, that may be the last known address for a number of people.
Right.
And so a number of those requests may go to the same address, but only the person who actually lives there is going to get the ballot and mail it back in. Just because you get the postcard asking if you want a ballot doesn't mean you're going to get one.
Right. So that's a great point, Sheriff Wagner. So when we mail those out, those postcards, state law only allows us to remove a voter from the voter file or the voter rolls for 3 reasons. One is if they die, so we monitor death notices. Another one is if they move to another jurisdiction, and so we will monitor voter registrations and driver's license applications in other jurisdictions. And then the third way is if they actually request to be removed from the voter roll. So we from time to time get voters who say, take me off. I don't want to vote anymore. Those are the only three ways. So yeah, when people are moving and they move a lot, unless they notify us, it's very difficult for us to know. I mean, we do have resources out there that help us. There's the change of address database through the Postal Service that does provide us some help. But yeah, so we mail those notices out. A lot of them get returned because they are not deliverable because the people don't live there anymore. By law, after a few of those mailings that get returned, then we can determine those voters are inactive. But when people do request a ballot, again, as I mentioned, they have to request the ballot. It has to be signed. And so we do have a verification process in the office. Every application is verified by a document that they've signed.
Todd, another hot button issue.
Yeah.
Do I have to show an ID to vote in Nebraska?
Not yet.
Okay.
That's a great question, Captain Vik. Last November, Nebraska voters did approve a constitutional amendment that would require photographic identification to be presented to vote. However, that language of that initiative left the responsibility of prescribing how to do that to the legislature. As of today, the legislature has not adopted any legislation that authorizes election officials to require a voter identification to vote. There are a number of bills that have been introduced in the appropriate committee. I know the legislature, I've heard the speaker say several times, Speaker Arch, talk about the importance that passing the voter ID legislation is a priority for this body. But as of, again, right now, we don't have that. So we are operating these elections under the pre-existing state law.
It's in flux a little bit for the time being.
For now.
Okay.
I think in the future, I don't know if it'll be by 2024, but sometime in the future, voters will have to present some type of voter identification. They just don't have to do it for their city elections this week or in May.
So just in summary, should citizens in Lancaster County be worried about their election security here?
No, our elections are very secure here in Lancaster County and in Nebraska. We're very fortunate. We have a lot of good governance in Nebraska, and so our elections are very secure. We've never had issues. That's not to say we may not have them in the future, but no, I mean, Lincoln voters should feel safe voting in our city elections in the next several weeks.
Well, we're certainly happy to do our part to help with that. We talked a little bit about what our role in that process is. So, Sheriff, how long have we've had a history of helping other county agencies other than the Election Commission?
Absolutely. I mean, we provide security for the clerk and the assessor's office when they do real estate valuation protests. We do the same thing for the county board, security for the county board, and they have their meetings. And so there's a number of agencies that we will assist when special need arises.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, I remember working, some time at the county health department,
right.
For various clinics way before COVID, and the courts kind of go. That's a little bit more of a statutory responsibility,
right.
but certainly we help secure the county and district courts. And I think, Ben, would you say? I mean, we just our role, I think, as I view it, is we want to provide a safe, secure environment for people to be able to exercise their rights and go about their business with the government.
Correct. And there's some people that have it in their mind that they want to interfere with people's rights, and that's where I think we come in and make sure that does not occur, like I said earlier. So I think it's important on that, and we want people to feel like that they can come to our county facilities and be safe. We're certainly here not to intimidate or anything like that. We're just make sure everybody is able to get what they need and do what they need, for themselves.
So this is your first election as election commissioner. But what are some of the things that deputies do at your office? Do you have any specific plans or needs on election day?
Well, just having the presence, I think, is helpful because at our central office, that's where we count all the ballots. And unfortunately, there are people out there who may want to disrupt that process. And so the staff at the office provide some security, I think provide some deterrence to individuals who are trying to disrupt the process. But also just observing, just like I said, to make sure that there's a lot of, I would say, traffic, anybody that's been out there, a lot of activity that goes on out there, a lot of people driving through the parking lot, dropping off supplies. So just having an orderly flow of traffic is also really helpful.
Certainly. Well, we're happy to help do that. You've answered a ton of questions today. It's very interesting information for those of us that don't live in the election world every day. But like you said, these are regular things that happen, that come up, and people need information. Where can they go if they have questions about elections in Lancaster County?
Yeah, I mean, the two easiest ways, obviously, we have a telephone number. They can reach me. That number is area code 402-441-7311. But we also have our website. It's www.lancaster.ne.gov/election.
Awesome.
So anybody out there that has any questions, have those two resources.
Any other thoughts?
No, I just remind people that our primary election is tomorrow. It's Tuesday, May 4th. The polls will be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And the ballots, if you do have one of those early vote ballots, they need to be dropped off in the parking lot mailbox by 8 o'clock as well. Don't put those in the mail because it's not one of those postmark. It has to be in the office by 8 o'clock tomorrow.
It's not May 4th, it's April 4th.
I'm sorry, April 4th.
April 4th and May 2nd.
April 4th is the primary. May 2nd is the general.
Oh, one more quick question. How many people do you think, what percentage of voters are you going to get this year? Have you done any work on that?
Yeah, I'm estimating 35%. I think 35 would be a good number.
It always amazes me. It's always so low. It's such an important thing to do.
And people complain about, they're complaining about the voting process, and then they don't vote. And so, getting the vote out is, as an elected official, that's one of the more challenging things, is to encourage people to vote on election day, whether it's by absentee or in person. They need to make their vote count.
Yeah. It's just like I said, it's really hard to complain about what you don't like if you don't get out there and use your voice. And yes.
Okay.
Well said.
Well, Todd, we just want to thank you for coming on today and spending some time with us. Very interesting information, some of which is very relevant in the near future. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity, Captain Vik. Thank you.
Take care. We'll be right back.
If you want a challenging career, a career where you can make a difference in your life, your family's life, and the lives of those in your community, come and join the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. To learn more or to apply, visit us online at www.joinlso.com.
We are back for our mailbag segment on the 902 podcast, and we would certainly encourage people to submit questions to us online. You can reach us via email by sending an email to lso@lancaster.ne.gov. You can also interact with us on social media at LSO Nebraska on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or even on YouTube. Feel free to send us a question, and we may be able to answer it for you. Sheriff, there is a question that we've gotten I guess, for a few times recently, but we received this question a lot of different ways. But it references the idea of a constitutional sheriff, and people bring this up when it comes to COVID restrictions, guns. Even we're talking about election security today, and people have talked about your oath or your duty. Mm-hmm. Are you a constitutional sheriff?
So when that question's been posed to me a number of times, so I thought, not sure. So I looked in the Nebraska Constitution, and the office of sheriff is not established in our Constitution. All it says is that the counties may create those elected officials or those elected positions necessary to provide services to their constituents. So it's the legislature can establish those positions, and that's what they've done. There are some states where sheriffs, along with a number of other elected officials, are spelled out in their state constitution. So, in my mind, those are constitutional sheriffs. I am not. Then, when I got to looking at, there's an organization called the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. It's headed by a retired one-term sheriff out of Arizona, and they are trying to recruit sheriffs and chiefs of police to be constitutional sheriffs. And then, under their definition, constitutional sheriffs believe that sheriffs are the highest government authority in the county, and that they have the power and duty to defy or disregard any laws that they deem unconstitutional. And that's those three words, that they deem unconstitutional, are concerning to me, and it should be concerning to everybody. We are not giving the authority. We're not given the authority to disregard laws that we don't feel are constitutional. There are ways to object to laws and to pursue a ruling to determine whether they're constitutional or not, but just not enforcing them is not one of those avenues. And so, immigration, gun control, medical mandates that we saw in COVID, most of those things are established in state law, and we just don't have the, we've taken an oath to uphold the Constitution of the state of Nebraska and the United States of America, and it doesn't say if you like that law or not. It just says we're going to uphold the laws of the state and the Constitution of the state and nation, and without reservation. So it's not our duty to make the laws, or interpret them. It's our duty to enforce what the lawmakers pass. Does that sound?
I think, that's perfect on that part of it, because that's what they are beginning to ask you to do. They want you to just ignore it,
Yep.
or, they've thought with the COVID mandates and that you have a lot more power of being able to go in there and override them, and that power isn't yours; it's in the health department. Yeah,
the Nebraska legislature has given health departments that authority, and they exercise that authority during the COVID pandemic. So, and it looks like some of the sovereign citizen movements with some of the ideological similarities, as far as they don't feel that the Internal Revenue Code is constitutional. They don't feel some of the government regulations like motor vehicle license plates and taxes and driver's license are constitutional, and so they won't do it. And so they are encouraging people to vet their sheriff and encourage them to become constitutional sheriffs, and it's just not going to happen in Lancaster County.
And like you said, in Nebraska, although it may be different in other states, it's not in the Nebraska Constitution as far as the office of sheriff.
That's correct. It lies with the legislature, and so the legislature has on occasion had proposals to eliminate elected officials in counties. There's only one elected official in cities, and that's usually the mayor and the city council. But none of the department heads are elected. And that would be the same sort of situation if the legislature eliminated county elected officials. Then the county board would elect people to do those jobs.
Well, like we said at the beginning, appreciate you answering that question. If people have additional questions, they can send them to you directly. We'll answer them on the air if we can. And you can send those questions to lso@lancaster.ne.gov via email, or reach us on social media, Facebook Messenger, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. Come find us, and we'll try and get an answer to your question in a future episode. That is all the time that we have for today. We appreciate everyone listening in. Thank you again, Sheriff Wagner, Chief Deputy Houchin, for being here today. And we'll see everyone next time on another episode of the 902 podcast.